Hi, welcome back to this episode of Dialed In Angling. We literally just stepped foot off the ice. My hands are still cold. I was doing a little pan fishing up in the Bemidji area with none other than Will Pappenfus. You know, Will is a guide, a tournament angler. He spends a lot of time. I see a lot of his social media posts where he's posting big fish. He's just a fish head, a fish nut like me. I've known Will for quite a while, Walleye Will. He goes by a lot of different names. Obviously friends with Nick Sakella, who I fish with a lot, Mitch Hackemuller. Will, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Happy to be here.
Hey, I tell you what, I'm still a little chilly from being out there, even though it was nice today. You know, just being on the ice and reacclimating into warmer temperatures here in the studio. I had an absolute gas fishing with you today. It was fun being outside, hole hopping. I don't want to spoil this entire segment for people, but we did great. I was able to scratch that panfish itch. You know, I've done a ton of ice fishing already this year, not just with Dialed In Angling, but on my own, but primarily walleye fishing. You know, I've been chasing walleyes, a few perch. I just haven't gotten out pan fishing. You know, we've rapidly gotten into, it seems like, the middle of winter and we're still in December yet. And yet I haven't been able to do some of the things I want to do on the ice, and pan fishing's high on my list. You know, people always ask me as a guide, what do you do on your day off? Well, I go fishing. But in the winter months, I spend a lot of time pan fishing because I'm chasing walleyes all the time. And when I get a day off, I want to catch some aggressive fish. You know, a lot of times I'm chasing crappies, I'm chasing bluegills. And I think I speak for both of us when I say, when I chase panfish, a lot of times I like to go after big panfish. I'm not even keeping them. I just want to catch big panfish and release them. The bite we're on today was definitely a big fish panfish bite. That's it, saying the least.
Yeah, I mean, we worked our tails off today, drilling holes, trying to stay on them. I mean, even with the cloudy conditions and, the weather conditions we had, we hit it pretty spot on for what was shaping up all week after going from 20 below to 20 above to 30 above now. It kind of just perfect with the full moon and everything. We hit the nail on the head, and it was fun.
Yeah, I would say they were biting really good, and the bite itself was good, but you always have to kind of work hard for panfish. The days of just going out and sitting in one spot and letting fish come to you just doesn't happen anymore. I drill holes all the time, and now with forward-facing sonar, it seems like you're always moving, staying on them. I don't mind that part of it. I actually like that part. Hunting down fish is what I do. I love that. I love finding fish. I think probably the best part of my job as a guide, or even with Dialed In Angling, is figuring out bites and finding bites and drilling holes into bites. And that's what I love about forward-facing sonar, is it gets you to that point. You can find the fish much quicker. And, I'm looking in areas now that I may have never looked before. I know for panfish, I used to fish weed beds and shallow flats and humps, and then I'd fish basins, but nothing in between. Now I'm looking for fish all over the place. I consider everything off the edge a basin, and everything off the edge go-to areas. I can't tell you how many times I've found panfish where I never looked before. Maybe it was a shallower basin or a drop-off coming off an area where normally I would just go out to the middle of the basin, kind of look around there, and then I would go back up on the hump. Now I look all over the place. And it seems like you find a lot of big panfish, for me anyway, kind of on, inside turns or edges where they're kind of in between. They're not out in the deep, deep part of the basin, and they're not up on top. What do you think?
The biggest thing I've learned is a lot of times, like after work, I could get out, about 3-4 o'clock, get out and fish the evening bite. And I'd go up on the edge of a hump or a weed line or edge of a basin and wait for them to slide up to eat. Well, little did I know, 20 to 30, 40, 50 feet away, they were swimming right there the whole time, and I never knew. And now we can drop forward-facing sonar down, and we can chase them all day long until they slide up right before dark. So that was kind of the biggest eye-opener to me, instead of having just to sit there to wait for them, thinking they're coming from, a half mile out or something. Literally, they're only 20, 30 feet away from me the whole time I'm sitting there.
Yeah, and when they're in that area, that kind of in-between area, what I like about that too is they're not that deep. if they're in a really deep basin and you're catching them, I hate doing that because I don't want to kill these fish. A lot of times I just go out. I'm looking like you. I'm looking for big fish. Yeah, there's certainly times where I'm looking to harvest a few crappies or a few smaller gills to eat, but most of the time, if I'm out recreational fishing, I'm not, harvest is the last thing on my mind. I want to catch some big ones. So when I'm in that in between depth, let's say 11 to 20 feet, for example, you're not killing those fish. And so, you can catch them and release them and not have to worry about it. Whereas if you're out in the deepest part of the wintering basin, yeah, I worry about barrel trauma. I don't want to release a bunch of dead fish, and I don't want to go catch, crappies and bluegills that are right on the bottom in 30 feet. I try to avoid that if I can. So shallower basin lakes or up on the edges of these basins is where I go. And you know, even if it's the doldrums of winter, I still like chasing panfish, and I like being outside hole hopping if I can for that, like we did today. I don't want to spoil the entire episode, but people listening that know me, for example, they know I like to drill holes and move around. That's no secret at all. And what we did today, obviously you knew where the fish were. We got out there, but they're moving, they're swimming, and we were able to just kind of stay on top of them. And, I wouldn't say we picked on the same school of fish either. It seemed like we were finding a certain pot of fish that had, more crappies in the mix, if you will. And then kind of that first pod we were on, I would say that we're more gills up in that area and maybe some perch mixed in as well. But, it's not like we were harassing the same school or trying to land on that same school of fish. There was multiple pods of fish all over.
Yeah, and I know a bunch of those fish probably pushed in from, even a mile away from us that all of a sudden randomly would just show up. I mean, we were just fishing this little pinch point on the corner where they'd come flying in and then they'd move out after you beat on a couple, and you'd have another school come out from the abyss, basically come in, and we catch a couple of those. So all day long, they were just simultaneously cycling in and out, and we just had to land on them at the right time.
Yeah, it's fun. I don't know what it is, the intrigue of pan fishing. Maybe it goes back to me being a kid and catching bluegills off the dock, but I have always enjoyed catching panfish. And there's certain times a year where that's all I'm focused on. Early ice, I don't get to panfish as much as I do late ice just because I'm busy most of the time guiding, or now with dialed and angling, chasing bites around. I would do a lot of walleye fishing this time of year, but I enjoy it early ice. I enjoy it late ice, and then I enjoy pan fishing in the spring and then again in the fall. And so being able to get out in relatively early ice situations and chase them like we did today, it was an absolute blast for me. I was looking forward to this trip. I got up at like 3:30 in the morning. I was all jacked up. I got up before my alarm went off and I was ready to go. I had all the gear packed last night. I think with panfish too is there's different fishing you can do. Like today, we were using a lot of small tungsten and that sort of thing. Whereas I also love spoon fishing and fishing jig wraps and fishing some more aggressive style baits for especially crappies in a relatively shallow basin situation. But today using small tungsten, and they'd come up in that bite, that especially when you have crappies and bluegills in the mix, because there's times where your cadence, your jigging cadence, and your aggressiveness changes from a crappie to a bluegill, right? And it also, your hook set, when you're about to set the hook on a bluegill versus a crappie, it's different. You're waiting for those bluegills to load up versus those crappies just kind of hit it or sometimes slackline you. And when they're mixed in, sometimes they fool you as far as how they act in the water column. I know I got fooled today a couple different times where I was like, oh, that's definitely a crappie, and it was a bluegill, because one would just shoot out of the pack, and you expect that from crappies.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've been fooled out here. The other day I could have swore I had a decent walleye on, and it was an absolute giant crappie. And then another time I was like, yeah, this is probably a pike. Well, it happens to be like an 11-inch bluegill. So, I mean, you never really know for sure. I mean, I don't know how many, I don't care how many fish you catch and how many times you think you know, but there's a lot of times you just never know for sure.
Yeah, right. And you're using light rods, right? Super finesse, really light line, super finesse rods, something with a lot of backbone, but a real soft tip. So, yeah, it seems like every fish you get on is a battle, like especially those big gills. I mean, you get some of those 9.5, 10.5 inch gills. Yeah, they fight like a pike. I mean, that pull, they just pulsate with that rod tip. And that's part of the intrigue to them. I think for me, even more so than the fight of a bluegill, is getting them to bite, right? Working it perfectly so you get that strike from that gill. There's so many times where they just stare at it. And if you move that bait wrong, they're gone, right? They're not even interested. And there's other times where they come up and just kind of nip the tail. And you want to set the hook so bad. I want to set the hook so bad, but you know that you got to let them load up. And there's times where they grab the tail and then just release it. And you want to just, freak out. But if you just hold it there and you barely move that rod and just kind of hold it, they'll come back. Sometimes it's like they get a little taste. And then when they do come back, they hit it again. And then boom, that second strike, they're on there. I had a couple today where literally I felt like it was like their 10th bite, right? I was just kind of holding them. I think you even referenced like Lindy rigging, like feeding them line. I almost felt that way with some of those fish because some of those really big ones, you had to give them a long period of time before you set the hook. Otherwise, you miss that fish.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I rolled a couple today I definitely would have liked to have back. But it just, you get excited and, you feel him bite once and they bite again. He's like, oh, yeah, he's definitely got it. No, definitely doesn't. But there was one point, I mean, I gave him all of my rod all the way down to the bottom of the ice and lifted up. And I finally caught one and it was like almost a 10-incher or right at it. And it was just like, do I have to do this for every fish? I don't think I can do do this.
There's not a panfish angler listening to this podcast that hasn't missed one like that, or you roll a gill where you wish you had that one back. I mean, even today, I think, one of the first fish that I set the hook on, I gave him a long time. I thought he had it, he was almost like running with it, and I just rolled him, and I watched him on the Markham just kind of roll over. And of course, he didn't come back. But his buddy bit for me. He came up out of the bottom, and he ended up whacking that bait. So, no, thanks. It was an absolute blast out there. Hey, we're going to get away from talking about today's bite, and let's roll into a couple things about you. Because I've known you for a long time. I've known you're good friends with Nick. You're good friends with Mitch and some of my other really close buddies and fishing buddies. But a little bit of background on you now. Did a podcast with Nick. Nick and I fish all the time. I know you went to Bemidji State with Nick. Tell me a little bit more about kind of your college experience, how you got your fishing start. I know you're a walleye angler. You're a tournament angler. You're a guide. You spend a lot of time on the water. How'd you get started in this whole madness?
Yeah, I would say my dad for sure. He got me into it long ago, and my mom or my grandma even, or dad would drop me off at the lake when I was young, whether it was at a random dock to fish off for a few hours, or if it was the winter, they'd drop me off and I'd take my sled and auger and I got an FL8 when I was in like 6th grade, I want to say. So I was just super jacked up when I got that. I got out and I'd go and walk halfway across the lake or all the way across the lake and drag a sled and everything, no matter how much snow there was, to get out to where I needed to go. And, it just grew from there. And, I'd fish in random league nights and stuff back home. Or when I came up here to college, we had the bass team just getting started here at BSU and did that a little bit, but I just loved walleye fishing. Bass were fun, but the walleyes for sure just, take the cake for me. And, and I ended up meeting Nick my sophomore year of college. And, he's like, you want to fish a walleye tournament? And I'm like, yeah, I kind of really want to. He's like, oh, we should go fish this one on Pool 4 down on the river. And I was like, I'm in, I never fished down there. He's like, I fish down there all the time. Yeah, we'll be all right. I'm like, all right, and roll down there and I have this is just totally different. Like river stuff, I didn't grow up on the river. I mean, we had a couple of rivers around, so I kind of had an idea, but, just a strictly lake fisherman back then. And we went down there and we randomly stuck a big one right at the end of the day. I ended up getting 4th place. And we were like, yeah, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I don't care how many or what I have to do. This is what I want to do. And it just all grew from there.
Cool. Yeah. I'm similar situation where I I grew up on a lake river system. I fished all the time. I was a nut. Ice fishing, open water, didn't matter. You'd see me biking around town with my rod in hand, and I was doing the same thing. And ice fishing for me too, I would just like literally walk down the hill from my parents' house, and I'd sit out there all day, and I didn't care. I didn't care how far I had to go, where I had to drill. I had a hand auger to begin, ice fishing until my dad got us a Strike Master gas auger. And I'm like you, I can't remember a time, from my earliest memories, earliest childhood till now, where I wasn't fishing or fishing wasn't part of that. So all through college, same deal. I met some of my closest friends in college is because of fishing, or hunting, but a lot of it had to come down to fishing. And I started fishing tournaments when I was a teenager with my dad. He used to cart me around all these tournaments, and I had a blast. And I always gravitated towards walleyes as well. People always want to categorize other anglers, like, what kind of angler are you? Well, for me, I like catching everything. So, I love smallmouth bass, like certain times of year when the topwater bite's on fire. Like if I get done guiding, I'm going back out topwater fishing. I'm fishing bass. There's other times of year where, like I said, it's spring, for example. I cannot wait to go spring crappie fishing. But then you fast forward to opener, and my mind is completely on walleyes. Or, even before that, sometimes going out to Green Bay, for example, early spring, rainy river. Like I'm focused on walleyes. I love walleye fishing. I'm like you. I think I remember trolling shad raps out in front of my parents' house, just like with a rowboat, just putting the rod in between my legs. I didn't even have a motor at the time. I think I was 8 or 9 years old, rowing with a number 5 shad rap, and boom, caught a walleye. And I was like, this is it. I want a walleye fish. And that kind of sealed it for me. And then, going to Mille Lacs with my dad, Winnie with my dad, and catching walleyes like they're bluegills. And I remember at an early age like that thinking, yeah, that's what I want to do. And then, of course, my Uncle Gary, my dad, they were all tournament anglers fishing walleyes at the time. So, I would go bass fishing as a kid. I'd be throwing topwater for bass, or I wanted to throw a spinner bait or something to catch pike and bass. And my dad would be like, you don't want to catch those bass. You want to walleye fishing, so the intrigue of walleyes was always there for me as well. When Will has a day off, and you're not fishing tournaments or you're not guiding, what would you like to chase? What's your favorite fish to chase? Obviously walleyes, but is there like a specific bite that you like doing that above any else? And it could be summer, winter, whatever.
I would say mid-July, bouncing around small lakes, trying to find a 34-inch walleye. And I've got a 32 and a quarter. I've got a 32. I don't know how many 30 to 31s, but just trying to find that unicorn. I know a couple of my buddies who've gone out and they've got 33s, but we just can't seem to get over 33 and get that 34. So, I can't get above 32 and a quarter, but, we've been on the lakes to do it, but it's just timing. Everything's got to align for that fish to bite. I know we've seen them. It's just, when are we going to land on them on that right day?
Ice fishing is here, and it's time to hit the frozen water with OnX Fish. The Fish app is the most comprehensive fishing tool for increasing your confidence on ice. Use OnX Fish to find new places to fish and sort lakes by species, abundance, trophy, and keeper potentials. OnX Fish also shows you hot spots, lake-by-lake regulations, and private and public land ownership information. For a limited time, download OnX Fish for free in Minnesota and Wisconsin, or go to onxmaps.com/fish to get more information on the app that is changing the game on ice.
Anything over 30 to me, really, it depends on the lake, but most fish in that 30 or over category are, they're in a league of their own. You take a 26, 27, 28-inch walleye. They're impressive. Don't get me wrong. But as soon as you hit the 30, they're different fish. They totally are. And most of the time, most anglers, that's their goal, right? The 30-pound, the 10-pound walleye, the 30-inch fish, but they become a different species of fish to me, and they just become massive. Their tail, every feature on a 30-plus inch fish is just so much bigger than everything else that swims that is in the walleye category.
Yeah, they don't even look like walleyes when they get over. I mean, even if you have we had like a 31 in the well and a 32 in the well, just to quick get them in to throw them back. And they're just looking at the difference in between. They almost look like one looks like a Xander and the other looks like a a smaller one, but they're both giants. It's just like every inch you get is just a whole different species on them.
The eyeballs and just the fins and how what impresses me too is like you grab them under the gill plate and how big the gill plate is on a big walleye like that. But then, you go to grab behind like right in front of the tail, for example, how thick that is, always impresses me when you start looking at, 30 plus inch fish. They just look different. They're built differently. They feed differently. They live in different areas than the rest of the fish. I get caught in the trap all the time because I'm guiding a lot, So I get caught in the trap where I need to find numbers of fish. So I just get into areas. Oh, there's a bunch, beat on them. Whereas I'm not as laser focused as, going to chase the big ones. So yeah, when I get a day off or when I get time where I can just throw out fish myself, that's what I want to do as well, especially certain times of year, because for me, if I find fish, I'm trying to get people on the fish, right? I want them to cast to them or whatever. Same with ice guiding or even dialed in angling. We're seeing fish. We're trying to move to those bites. I'm trying to get my people that are on the show with me, we're working together as a team to get on those fish. When you're fishing by yourself, it's different, right? You can go out and you can just cast at that fish and you can do your own thing. And my wife teases me a lot because I'll get done guiding or I'll get done filming or something, and she'll be like, "Hey, what are you going to do tomorrow?" It'll be my day off. And I'm like, "Oh, I'm going fishing." She's like, "You just fished like 25 days in a row." Yeah, but I was guiding or I was filming or I was fishing a tournament. It's different. It's not the same, right? There's so many times, like for you, for example, you're pre-fishing for a tournament. You don't just get to fish all the time. You're looking. You spend hours scanning, and you're trying to put a game plan together. I enjoy just being in the boat by myself and fishing by myself, and no one else around. And it doesn't always have to be for walleyes. Like I said, I like chasing bass, smallmouth bass, largemouth bass. Not as big a musky head as I once was. I did like chasing down muskie. I see them all the time now on forward-facing sonar, like you say, scanning for big walleyes. I see so many muskies now that I'm like, I wish I had a bucktail in the boat, or you see these guys kind of chasing down fish out in the edges of basins or whatever. And I'm a little bit envious because I hardly ever have muskie tackle in the boat. And I see big pike sometimes too, where I'm like, whoa, there's a giant pike, And I know if I throw it, I don't get a bit off because all I've got is a 1/4 ounce jig and a paddle tail or whatever I've got rigged up, so.
Yeah, there's a couple times I'll bring a muskie rod with if I know where I'm going has them, just in case. Because, it's cool to catch them, but it's like just to see them, like just to have them follow up and just come by the boat and just sun themselves following the bait. It's just like, wow, these things actually swim in here. It's just
they're
like,
big.
Oh my gosh.
I've seen, thousands of muskies, right? But still, every time I see one, I'm like, whoa, it kind of almost takes your breath away. When they chase it up to the boat, you're like, dang, like you said, that thing lives in this lake, So I think, probably pike more than muskies go hand in hand with what we did today as far as pan fishing, right? I always think of like these great panfish lakes that are out in the backwoods. They almost always have some sort of predator that's just beasts in there, like big pike, giant largemouth, something that's feeding on them to kind of keep them in check and keep that size structure in check. Ice fishing, I can't tell you how many times where I've had 2 and 3 pound test on, but I see a giant fish on forward facing sonar or even 2D sonar, and you almost have to pull it away from that fish. But you more than ever, you just want to catch that fish, right?
Yeah, I don't know how many times it's like, it's another pike, but you'll say that time and time again. You'll see that big thing swimming in. Well, maybe it's a big pike. Let me try. It gets hard to pull away.
Oh, big fish in general. Hey, you touched on, or I guess I touched on it. you are recently married, right? This summer you got married.
October.
Dude, congratulations.
Thanks.
I've been married now for quite some time. My wife and I dated for like 6 years because I was a fishing nut and hunting all the time. My wife's not really into it. She likes being in the outdoors. She likes boat rides. She occasionally will fish. She'll fish if it's nice out. And then she's not ice fishing unless she's sitting in a wheelhouse, right? My wife is just not like that. But she sees the passion that I have, and she's always been like, and really embraced that. She's always kind of made it happen for me. She knew how passionate I was in the outdoors because we dated for so long, and she knew kind of the direction I wanted to go with my life, and she was all for it. So many people, they get married and, their spouse doesn't like it, or they, whatever reason doesn't work out. Right. And I'm just one of the lucky ones. I feel so lucky that my wife was always on board with it. So just a marital advice for you, make sure that, you make time for them too. Like I had to, I get so wrapped up on bites or like deer hunting, right? If bucks are in rut, that's what I'm focused on. Or, we've talked about different bites, like early ice. I want to get out walleye fishing. So I just, I do so much of it that I have to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, I still have to make time for my wife. So we go out to dinner and like do normal things and not just get so wrapped up in fishing that I forget about that.
Yeah. I, not so long after we started dating is when I started doing the national walleye tour, and she made it to the first season. Fall, she got a little crabby, but, she was all right with it. Then I was like, well, she can make it through another season. I was like, this one might have to be a keeper, and she made it through, and, she didn't throw anything at me or nothing or yell at me. So it's like, well, might have to keep this one around if she's all for it, so.
Well, it's hard when you're gone a lot too, like that, where you're on the road. That's tough. It's being away from home. It only gets tougher with kids. And, so I always try to, like, when I'm home, I don't want to call it brownie points or anything. I try to make time, to do stuff together, and as a couple, and then you start having kids and you got to make time for the kids. My kids absolutely love to fish. Absolutely. I mean, love to fish. My daughter, my son, they love it because I would just take them fishing, but it's almost like training bird dogs, right? You don't want to overdo it. When they're little like that, you just want a little bit at a time. Same with my wife. When we dated, I took her fishing way too much. She just almost burned her out, especially ice fishing. She did not want to ice fish. We'd go out in the portable. She didn't have the right boots on. We'd freeze. I want to stay out there, through bite windows and catch walleyes. It was long periods of time. And so it took a long time for my wife to kind of get back into, ice fishing and kind of, embracing it. And it wasn't until actually the last few years where, the gear has gotten so much better. She can wear a suit. She's got better boots. The electronics are cool. We do lots of trips with the kids where wheelhouses dude, it's like a built-in palace for families, and wives, so like, if you want to introduce, your wife to ice fishing, no better place than a wheelhouse, man. I mean, you can put the TV on. It's like built in. Now you can go run around outside and freeze your tail off and come back in, and she's happy as can be. So
yeah, all you have to do is take your wife out to like a rental, like on Red Lake, Lake of the Woods, Mille Lacs, wherever, Winnie. Get them out for a weekend, and you'll have them saying, it'd be nice to have one of these. If we had one of these, we could go fishing all the time. And that is your in right there for a brand new wheelhouse. You're welcome.
Yep, exactly. That's great advice for anybody. I kind of did that. My friends all had wheelhouses long before me. Everybody knows me. I like to drill holes and move around. I have like this, I call it adult ADD. I don't know what to call it, but I want to be on the fish. I mean, even so, you saw it today, like forward facing sonar. If I drop my 2D sonar in that spot where I just walked to where I thought the fish were and I don't see them, like I can't sit there. Like I got to be moving around. And so it took me a long time to get into the wheelhouse deal, but my wife actually wanted one before me. And I was like, nah, that's not my style. But once we got our first wheelhouse, it was fun. It was a blast. And I still can go out and do my own thing. I bring the portable behind, throw it in the back of the pickup, bring an auger so I can hole hop. I don't, I'm not necessarily just tied down, but I have a blast in the wheelhouse because everybody else is having a good time. And then when those bite windows hit where the fish are biting in the house, it's great being in there nice and warm, sitting there in your sweatpants, catching fish with your socks. You got the pizzazz pizza oven going, the TV with the game going. It's pretty hard to beat that.
Yeah, it kind of makes me want to go put one out right now.
We're getting close, man. Hey, I can't believe it. We're only a few weeks into ice fishing, but the temps have been so cold that people are already starting to venture out there. I mean, I always full disclaimer to people, like if I never want to be the first one on the ice with my truck. First of all, first one on the ice with my wheelhouse, but we're getting to that point where northern Minnesota, I mean, I think next weekend or in the next 2 weeks here, I think you're going to see a lot of lakes where you're going to get vehicle traffic, wheelhouse traffic. Again, if you're listening to the podcast, safety first. You got to check every inch of ice. I mean, nothing worse than, putting something through the ice because you didn't check it or went too soon when you could have waited a week. But I think by Christmas, there's going to be a lot of locations where you can have trucks and wheelhouses out, and it's going to be, we're almost there, and I can't believe it. I just feel like I'm pinching myself really because of last season, the sort of ice season we had, and now this year it was so warm this fall, and then all of a sudden, boom, we're just full blown ice season now.
Yeah, the biggest thing is what really helped us is we were supposed to get a bunch of snow right after the St. Paul Ice Show. And, up north they got some snow, but down by us here, we got a lot of rain. So basically any snow that was on top of the ice kind of got washed away, and then it was 20 some below for 2 nights in a row. And that really sealed and made a lot of ice during that.
But even, I was up on Red and Lake of the Woods and we were filming on Red. It was snowing, but it was like wet, heavy, kind of super saturated. So like it just almost turned right into water and then froze. So all that we gained into ice. So none of this fluffy, heavy snow. It always seems like right after the ice show, we get pounded with some sort of snowstorm, or it'll be like, I remember years where we had like good ice in November, so you're on really good ice by Thanksgiving. And then always right after Thanksgiving, it'd be like a blizzard and you'd get a foot of snow and it'd totally wreck things. And that was my concern so far for this season. Knock on wood, we have not experienced that at all, So I'm super grateful. I know a lot of other people are. I know a lot of people across the ice belt, whether it's Wisconsin, Minnesota, Dakotas, Iowa, they're all kind of in the same boat. I know people like already talking, tons of good ice in the metro. There's tons of good ice in Iowa. They're getting there anyway in northern Iowa. Definitely in the Dakotas. I was out there that first week, that first episode of Dialed In Angling out in Devil's Lake, and I couldn't believe how much ice they had. Considering that a few weeks earlier it was 50 degrees, man. So yeah, it's good to see. We're on a great track. Let's talk a little bit more about panfish, just the state of the state, if you will, of panfish. I think big bluegills, big crappies are getting harder and harder to find. I fished both species in Dakotas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin. And it just seems to me, 15 years ago, you could find, it's always cyclical, right? You have good panfish bites and they disappear. People either find out about it or those fish just cycle and they're gone, right? Especially crappies, they cycle a lot in these lakes. But it seems like now it's getting harder and harder to find some of those bites, if you will. I can think of, kind of the area we fished today, up in this area. Northern Minnesota still has some pretty quality pan fishing. Park Rapids, Ottertail County, they've got a lot of good bluegill lakes. Outside of that, it's hard. Then you get into the Dakotas. North Dakota certainly has some giant bluegills. South Dakota, same thing. But it always seems like you have to get on these really backwoods lakes to get, a legit 10-inch bluegill. And I don't know what your thoughts are, but I think the last few winters with the pressure being down, it seems like more lakes, even this summer, it seemed like I was catching some bigger bluegills in areas where I hadn't caught them in a while.
Yeah. Well, like I've noticed a big trend here the last probably 2-3 years now that, I was a college kid at BSU, came up here and, we started throwing big ones back. We never kept big ones. We kept, a few eater crappies or a few eater gills or something here and there. But we started throwing the bigger ones back and started teaching all our buddies and everybody, we need to throw these back. And ever since then, more and more college kids that came year after year, would be like, yeah, we're throwing the big ones back, whatever. We kept a few small ones to eat, and a few the other local guys and everywhere else are like, yeah, no, we've been throwing it back because we just want to catch big ones, we don't want to keep everything. And all the lakes that were good when I was in high school kind of got beat on a little bit for a while, but it seems like all those little gems are starting to come back now with guys practicing catch photo release versus just throwing them in the grease.
Yeah, and I like this Panfish initiative that Minnesota's gone to these 5 fish limits for bluegills or 10 fish, different experimental regulations, because I think it's really helped. I mean, I know lakes that I fish, I try to seek out the experimental lakes because there's good quality fish in there, and again, I'm not out there to harvest any out of that resource. I want to go catch big ones. If I, like I said, on my day off, I want to go catch big panfish, so I don't mind working a little bit. If I got to, walk, through the woods or take a 4-wheeler ATV trail or a snowmobile trail to get back into some of these locations. This year's nice because we don't have a ton of snow right now. I do want to explore a few lakes that I haven't been to, some real off the beaten path lakes that I know are super awesome bluegill bites. I haven't done that quite yet, but Christmas break time frame, I mean, that's on my radar. I was telling Nick, when we did our podcast that there's a couple things I want to do. One, bird hunting. I want to kill a few more grouse because we don't have a ton of snow. I want to take my dog out a few more times before that closes. But then number 2 on that list would definitely be chasing panfish in some backwoods lakes. I love that. I love the adventure part of it. Parking on a logging road and getting back into these places is what I absolutely love doing. When it comes to finesse fishing panfish, I think a lot of people overlook line, for example. They use too heavy a line. They also overlook like rod and reel. I see so many people that have, either kind of the noodle type of rods for bluegills and not something like with backbone and then a sensitive tip. And then I also see a lot of anglers that have these ice reels with these really tiny spools. And as soon as they open the bail, the first thing I look at, especially when I'm guiding panfish, I look at all the memory that's coming off their line. So I go over there, I fix that. I try to check what pound tests they have. For me, I like to get away with the lightest pound test I can. 2 to 3 pounds is about perfect. I don't know what your thoughts are, but I like to use a little bit bigger bodied spool. I still use a spinning rod or spinning spool. I'm not a huge fan of the other type of reels. I still use, like a bigger profile spinning, but then, something with a rod with backbone and a soft tip. And I like a little bit longer rod. I know some people like the really short panfish rods. So there's not a lot of wind or whatever, but I like a little bit longer rod when it comes to pan fishing. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I use 2 to 3 pound religiously. I have one spooled up with 3 and the rest spooled up with 2, but a lot of times I forget I'm using 2 pound line and I get a little grabby in the hole and I tend to break off a lot. So I try to get away with 3 as much as I can because you get the lightness of 2 and the heaviness of 4. So 3 pound seems to be my favorite and go-to. If I'm a hole hopping around, I'll have I like to use a 42 to 44 inch rod. That's just me. All I have to do is raise up when I set the hook on them and it sets the hook basically for me. I have a lot more play with it and I don't have to kneel down all the time. I can just stand up, or if I'm fishing out of my truck, I can just sit in my truck and drill a hole right next to it. Otherwise, if I'm in the house, it's, a 30 to 32 inch noodle and go away.
Yeah, right on. Wind is not your friend when you're pan fishing outside. I realize that. So, there's times where I want to be outside moving around, but if the weather's terrible and the wind is terrible, you almost have to jump in a shelter. You're going to catch more fish. I know there's times where I've been outside and I'm just not getting the bites that I would get if I was in the shelter. And so, the bite we had today was great because we were outside. It was a little breezy. It wasn't terrible. We were able to move around and get on fish. We kind of set up a grid system of holes, and then our grid expanded out a little bit. We started moving, a little bit further outside, and then we ended up cycling back through those holes. You can do that almost just as easy with a portable sometimes if you're by yourself, or a one-man portable. If it gets a little bit too windy, you just flip that thing over, and a lot of times you're going to get more strikes. I know there was times today where the wind started gusting and I was trying to hold it really still, and that wind kind of messed my bite up, for example, where I should have maybe turned my back and pointed that rod tip towards the hole a little bit more. Definitely, I can think of 2 or 3 times where, that wind blew a little bit and kind of threw off my bite, where I was thinking, man, if I had a flip over right here, I would have caught that fish. Or if I would have kind of put my back to the wind a little bit more, I would have caught that fish. It's incredible to me how finesse some of these bluegills get, especially bluegills, for example, get, throughout the winter months. Whereas summertime, man, gills, they bite like crazy. It's just one of those fish that is intriguing to me because, if somebody never ice fished their whole life, right? And we were talking in this manner on this podcast, how finicky these bluegills are, they would think we're nuts, because you think of a bluegill on a dock, for example, and how aggressive they are and how fast they bite something. Whereas in the winter, it's the exact opposite, and everything matters. Like your gear, your line, your jigs, your bait. If that bait's off, I like today. Again, I don't want to tease out the entire episode, but we were fishing live bait. And if that live bait isn't on there correctly, what happens is, let's say, use a wax worm, for example. And if it's kind of just off a little bit where it's hooked wrong and the wax worm's hanging off the side of the hook, for example, when you're jigging that spins down there, right? And what that's doing, it's creating twists in your line. And you jig enough in deep enough water, pretty soon now you have your jig's just sitting down there spinning and spinning and spinning, and you're not getting bites. So what I like to do a lot of times is I'll pull my jig up in the hole. I'll kind of put that jig down and I'll just hold it still to see what that bait's doing. To see what my bait looks like, first of all, on there, the live bait on my tungsten jig, to see if it's spinning in the hole, and just to look at it and just give it a second before I drop it down. I don't think a lot of anglers do that. I think they just take for granted it's just sitting down there.
Yeah, I'm 100% sure. I even check my line before I even head out just to make sure it's not coiling up. And I've gone away from putting my rods on the dash because when it's heated up and cold and heated up and gets cold again, it starts fraying your line and starts coiling it too bad. So I try to bring my rods in almost every night so they're not sitting in the truck cold, so I don't have that problem, and it seems to help a lot.
That is great advice for people, actually. I used to do the same thing. I'd throw hole hopping and it's cold out and I'm guiding, for example. I'm driving my truck or my UTV around looking for more fish. I'd always just throw it up on the dash, and then it'd be cold, and then I'd throw it up in the dash. And, it's really hard on that line. I like to put my rods back in the case, and I bring my case inside every night as well. I don't just leave it out there in 30 below. It helps with the drag systems. It helps with the line. I'm with you. I try to bring things in. It seems like now, like with lithium batteries, you're carrying all your stuff in anyway, right? I want to keep my lithium batteries warm so you can optimize the amount of holes you drill. I bring my gear in all the time. I used to just leave everything in my truck, and that's terrible. That's, you're just asking for things to be iced up and broken. And, I've even seen it too, where you throw your rod on the dash and it warms up and cools off, warms up, cooled up. I've actually broke a blank doing that. The rod tip broke. I think I melted it, and then it got in the cold and snapped. So I do like, the gear that we have nowadays. I think it's way better than it used to be. I think options for panfish anglers or ice anglers in general, as far as rod powers and actions that are out there and available, are miles ahead of what it was even 10 years ago. I mean, I can think of some of my first quote unquote panfish rods. They were pretty, if you saw them now, that you wouldn't even fish with that rod. The guides are too big, the blanks aren't right, there's not the right powers in action. Today's rods are so much better, and they're so much more technique driven, right? There's rods where it's specific for tungsten jigs. It's specific for spoons, small spoons, big spoons. It's specific for dead sticking. I mean, I really like what's available for ice anglers in general, as far as when it comes to rods, powers, and action, and lengths. It used to be always every rod was super short. And I always hated those short little rods. Wasn't it? I was always kind of pushing the envelope to get longer rods, not just for panfish, but walleyes, lake trout, going up to Lake Winnipeg, catching big walleyes. I wanted a big stick, man. You can build more power and action into a longer rod than you can these short rods. So, yeah, I truly believe if you're listening to this podcast and you struggle as a panfish angler, especially getting these finicky fish to bite, the details, and go out and get yourself a nice rod and reel combo. It's going to help you catch more fish. It's not just throwing, grabbing an old combo out of a bucket that's got, old line on it, memory, 8-pound test. You're just not going to catch these fish like we did today. So, well, we're getting close to the end of the podcast here. I had a great day of fishing with you, buddy. I hope people that are listening are going to tune in to Dialed In Angling and watch this episode. We absolutely killed it. We got some giants, true giants. I would consider true giant bluegills. We got some giant crappies. We gave a lot of information on Dialed In Angling like we always do. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come out fishing with me. It was a blast. Like I said, I couldn't sleep this morning at 3:00 in the morning. I was like a little kid at Christmas. I could not wait to get out pan fishing because I just haven't been able to do it. So for my first trip of the year, I want to thank you for it being an absolute success.
Yeah, it was fun. I couldn't ask for a much better day. Maybe a little less wind, but the weather and everything else was perfect. So.
Hey, I'll take it, man. Any day that I can get out and chase fish like we did today and do it with a good buddy is a great day in my books. And thank you for tuning into our podcast. Thank you for watching Dialed In Angling each and every week. We've got a ton of great episodes, a ton of great content coming for you the rest of the season. We want you to tune in. So until next week, I'm Tony Roach, and this has been the Dialed In Angling podcast. Thanks, Will.
Yep, thank you.